I was from Oklahoma, and a photographer was either somebody who worked for the newspaper or it was some pervert that took pictures of pinup girls, or worse. And so there was no such thing as art photography until I was exposed to different people like Robert Frank and Walker Evans, people like that. I could say I came to painting through photography just by my exposure from the art world. I can't even say that I used photography. I mean, I did take pictures, but if I did use it, it was in relation to something that was a step further, which was painting. I never was successful at integrating photography into a painting. It was just sort of a vocabulary that offered itself new ways of seeing that was like a jumping off point to making paintings. I guess the way a photo is printed on a page had some impact to me, and I could see that it was much better for my statement to go with a photograph than it would be for a sketch or something else. And so I ruled out making any sort of hand gestural movements which would create an artistic platform for my statement. And I didn't like that. I wanted something that was more neutral. I wanted to make a book. The book was the most important thing. And then the camera and the photographs followed that idea of the book. And it'll have words in it, and it'll have pictures in it. And instead of having watercolors, I want photographs to make these pages up. But I didn't know in lots of ways what I was doing. You know, it's not like, well, you create a painting or you create a drawing, but in this case I'm creating something else. You know, it was neither fish nor fowl for me. And then after I made the one book, I felt like, well, I have to add to that dialogue. I've got other things to say in this book form, and that's where it started. A lot of it was the fact that I lived in this city that I felt had offered me all kinds of little sparkly things that I was not used to in my early days of life. And so LA to me was an accelerated culture out here, and fast cars, etc., palm trees. So I found things here that I felt like I had to make official statements about. I was really curious about homemade things and the fact that people would take a brownie camera and take family pictures, and obscure things always interested me when you know, a camera would be turned on a subject that was uninteresting or not considered official or important. And I always called them snapshots. The world of snapshots interested me, and so I went from there to taking snapshots of gasoline stations and apartment houses. The gas station photos were taken in 1961, 2, 3, and today those buildings are like 60, 70 years old, and they begin to have a flavor of times past. I'm like acutely aware of passage of time, and photography is not innocent of that phenomenon. It always shows the era of time. I mean, photography went through a period there in the 50s and 60s when new kind of color came into be, and you can look at those old snapshots from that era and tell pretty much exactly when those pictures were taken. I think the gas station itself, I mean, if you reduce it to what its real form is and its function, you find out that you have a little structure, sort of a box, and on that box you put a canopy. Goes out, and usually that canopy will take on some form of a exaggerated architectural gesture. And so studying these photographs, I began to maybe pick up on the zoom effect of a big canopy that comes off. And And then I began really appreciating this one particular gas station, which was in Amarillo, Texas. I think the place still exists, but maybe it's a secondhand store now or something. And then from there I started making sketches of it, and it eventually evolved into a painting. It was extremely important at the time to use the word gasoline, and just because the word has some sort of isolated power to it, and curious, yes, it's true, they are gasoline and they are gasoline stations, but the word gasoline has its own kind of funny rolling edges to it, you know. And I even remember a book of poetry by Gregory Corso that was called Gasoline. And I started seeing books. That got me into the idea of making a book. I'm not beyond seeing that there's something enigmatic in it that I felt like was necessary. And it was rough around the edges. And I remember when I made this book, I was surprised by people I would give this book to. I mean, if I gave the book to someone, say, who worked in a gas station, they might flip through it and say, oh yeah, God, I know that, that's Richfield, yeah, that kind of stuff. And then if I gave it to somebody who was a poet or a scientist or something, they may say, are you putting me on? What is this? So people of intellect had their doubts and suspicions of what I was up to. People who were had unclouded minds about what art was all about were okay with it, and maybe even amused by it. There were lots of steps that I had to learn about. A lot of them were self-taught, and having the typeset and presenting it as a piece of photographic camera-ready art. So the whole process of making it was a new thing for me. This is like my own little kiss by angels creation. My friend Mason Williams, who I grew up with in Oklahoma, he came to California with me, and we always had this let's make a book mentality. And you stub your toe, make a book about it. And we just happened to be on this venture to Las Vegas, and driving back, we had a broken typewriter that we tossed out the window, and drove on, not really thinking too much, got about 40 miles away, and it began to dawn on us that maybe there was some higher purpose back there. Let's go back and see what this higher purpose is all about. And so the three of us reversed and went back, and then kind of, you know, we saw this minefield of objects out there that had exploded on the side of the highway, and began to see some possibility that this had something to say. We treated the whole site area like a crime scene, and we gathered every one of these little pieces of metal and twisted this and that and snapped broken pieces of glass, and we gave it to somebody who had a typewriter shop here in LA, and he identified every one of those objects for us, and we used those titles for each one of those things as though they're like some significant planets out there in the galaxy, and we had to name them, and they were correct names. So it was all part of the same kind of playbook, rule book. You know, I drift in and out of delusions of, well, am I interested in this or am I interested in that? And somehow the idea of fires integrated itself into my work in different ways and different forms. Like paintings, I would sometimes do fire, and the idea of a lit cigarette or you know, a torch or something like that, it worked into this book of various small fires. The milk aspect of it was I guess I had this thing in mind that the injection of some subject that is unlike whatever the hell is happening is, what do they call that in music? A coda? You know, it's like at the end of a symphony, and then you might hear a broken glass or something noise that would wrap up the final symphony. So it's just like I guess you'd call it an art tool. I think the fire thing it was like a way to not have to paint the same thing, or it adds a little bit to whatever story is going on. It's like taking it an extra step, and there's no reference to misfortune because of a fire or anything like that. It's like you could say that, well, fire can be actually visibly beautiful. You know, it can have its own shape and it can have its own reality, and so why not explore that? I started seeing parking lots, and particularly empty parking lots, from the freeway. And I could see that, wouldn't it be better if I could have an aerial photograph of this rather than taking it from the side of a freeway? So then that led to, okay, how can I find a photographer who does aerial photography and go up in a copter? I consider myself the author of the idea and the product, which was a book, and it was put together by somebody who really had a critical finger on the shutter release. By hiring him, I eliminated the idea that you're even thinking about a camera. You've just got this picture of all these parking lots that are in critical focus. Well, the Sunset Strip was, you could call it mythical, you could call it popular, you could call it well-known. I used to hang out on the Sunset Strip just for the fun of it and for the energy of it. I just thought this is an obvious study to pick Sunset Boulevard, and I photographed the entire 27 miles of it ×2 across the street. And then the Sunset Strip part of it, which was like 2.5 miles, became this excuse for me to make this accordion fold book. And the idea of, you know, recording the facts of a street and the way it looks and all that was critical at that time, but it didn't necessarily have to have any agenda to it. I like the idea that I could move in a truck and have a camera take pictures in a horizontal manner down the street, and have my principal focus be something that was very much like a facade that you traveled along and photographed. And then printing it on this paper before the book was folded, I could see that, God, it is very facade-like. It's in this form, it's even a piece of paper. And there's not much behind it either. So I began to look at buildings as though they were just there to interest us, and that maybe there was nothing really behind it at all except some supports and braces that hold up this facade. When I took the pictures, I was aware that certainly time changes, and when it does, it leaves behind all kinds of debris. It also brings forward things. It brings forward the interest in the history of it, and so it was kind of double-edged. The Chinese scrolls, I mean, they were doing that in the 10th century, I think. And so they had artists then that were viewing the world like that, and very much like I was maybe seeing the Sunset Strip in my time of life. There are elements that you have, your sights are on it, and you have to somehow take these elements and piddle with them, you know, in different ways, and that's really, that's just elemental, you know, for an artist to do that. So I still remain puzzled over the whole galaxy.